Muir-Harmony on the telephone with us right now. How's that for an intro?
That's fantastic. Thanks for having me this morning.
Oh, it is our pleasure. The book is Apollo to the Moon, and it's a history in 50 objects celebrating the 50th year of the landing on the moon by Apollo 11. And my goodness, Teasel Muir-Harmony, you are the curator of the Air and Space section, I guess, of the Air and Space Museum, of the Apollo section. Tell me about putting this together and selecting the particular artifacts you wanted to include in this book. You had so many choices.
You're right, so many choices, so thousands of objects to choose from and all different types of objects. So I really wanted to do sort of a cross-section that represented all these different dimensions of Apollo history. So it tells the history of the technology and the science, but also the cultural, political, and social dimensions of the history as well. So it's a great variety of objects, and it was really fun to work on each of the essays. So from things like the command module, which you might expect, to a razor and shaving cream that was taken up to the moon by Apollo astronaut Mike Collins.
I love the fact that there are so many very personal items that really humanize this whole thing, and it makes it more than just about old space stuff. It's great to see the human element.
Yes, and I tried to include a lot of quotes as well. There are transcripts of the flights and then also lots of oral history interviews to really get that sense of what it was like to be there and the people involved in the program, because they have fascinating stories to tell, and their experiences are something that I just wanted to share.
And there are so many unexpected things like the chairs that were used by JFK and Richard Nixon in the televised presidential debate. And the space program, obviously, the reason for their inclusion in the book is the space program was a big topic of discussion during that debate.
Mm-hmm. And also that it was this time in politics where television really became seen as an important medium in politics. And so the Kennedy-Nixon presidential debate was the first televised presidential debate. And Kennedy grew to really appreciate the importance of prestige and image. He was really attuned to public image, and this debate was part of that experience. So it's an important part of the Apollo history as well, because as sometimes people forget, Project Apollo was, for Kennedy at least, really motivated by the Cold War context and geopolitical considerations. So he thought leading the world in space exploration was really essential for American national security and global power.
We're talking with space historian Teasel Muir-Harmony. The Smithsonian has put out this book, A History in 50 Objects, Apollo to the Moon, and it is absolutely just a wonderful book. And you mentioned the whole television aspect of the moon program and of the Apollo program down through the years. Of course, we think of guys like Eric Sevareid, but most especially Walter Cronkite and his fascination with the space program. And you actually have as one of the items, and I think one of the things we have to realize is these are items that the Smithsonian has in its possession, is the little model of the lander that Walter Cronkite used and held up to the camera during his television coverage of the landing on the moon. Tell us about coming across that and so many of the other items in the television section of this book.
That's such a special artifact. So Walter Cronkite at the time was he's known as the most trusted man in America. And 94% of American households tuned in to the CBS coverage of the first lunar landing flight to watch Cronkite and his team. And even the White House was tuning into CBS to watch the flight. And they had journalists stationed around the world to also report on the audience around the world tuning in to watch the flight. It was a huge production. It took thousands of people, and it was a celebrated broadcast. That's for sure. And they also published a book that follows that broadcast. Another artifact that's sort of connected to the broadcast of the first lunar landing is this boomerang from Australia, which might be a surprising connection at first, but Australia worked with the United States to help receive the signal from the moon and then broadcast it around the world. And the first lunar landing was actually the first live global television broadcast in history as well.
When we walk into the Smithsonian, we are treated to the site of the command module. And it is one of those things that it's one of the real stunning things to realize that this tiny little piece of machinery really is the symbol of America and of mankind stepping out into the universe and sort of introducing itself to the universe as a whole. And the recovery of it and the display, I know it was important, and what I'm leading up to is Michael Collins is, of course, very important to the history of the Smithsonian, and he was a part of that crew, and he wrote the foreword to this book. How special was it to have Michael Collins' involvement in this project?
It was extraordinary, and it was so lucky. So he was the director of the Air and Space Museum when it first opened in 1976, and he donated a lot of his personal artifacts to the museum as well. So he's been a huge supporter of the Smithsonian for many, many years, and is a wonderful writer. His autobiography, I highly recommend it. It's just a sort of a stunning, really intimate portrait of spaceflight and what it was like. And so I felt extremely lucky to work with him on this book and this forward.
And probably, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'll mention that the command module that he flew is in Pittsburgh right now, on display in our Traveling Destination Moon exhibit.
Yeah. So it's right next door, and folks can actually see that. One of the great things about it, and maybe my favorite artifact that is pictured in the book, is the ye old lunar scratch pad of Michael Collins.
Yeah, so the astronauts use these checklists, these paper checklists, really essential, sort of to mediate both between the astronauts and the machines, and to help them make sure that they were doing everything in this complex schedule of input and activity, and working with their computers and making sure that they were doing everything they needed to do on board to ensure a successful mission. And
you have to, you really get an insight into his mind as he was thinking about that. Like there's a notation where he wrote on the ye old lunar scratch pad, looks simple, not so. And another one where he says, all this is possible only through BS&T, meaning blood, sweat, and tears of many American workmen at the various factories and painstaking tests and retests. It really gives you an insight into his appreciation for what went into this historic flight.
Yeah, and the astronauts were well aware of the hundreds of thousands of people who worked to make Project Apollo a success, and they would visit the different factories and work with everyone involved. And with their training, they'd often train 7 to 8 hours per hour of mission time. And the missions were multiple days, so you get a sense of sort of how extensive the training was. But all the astronauts really appreciated the fact that it was a team effort. It wasn't one individual, but it really took the whole country too, because the hundreds of thousands of people involved officially and then unofficially across the entire nation to make the project a reality. And then it was also federally funded, so they appreciated that aspect of the success of lunar exploration as well.
We're talking to Teasel Muir-Harmony today, Apollo to the Moon, A History in 50 Objects. You mentioned the exhibit that is traveling around right now and is right here in Pittsburgh. What else do people see in that exhibit?
That exhibit really focuses on Apollo 11 in particular, so it's some really special artifacts from 11, and you can also see things like the redesigned command module hatch. So this was really important, and there was a fire, Apollo 1 fire, in 1967, and almost crippled the program, and so they redesigned a number of aspects of the command module to make it safer, including a hatch that was much easier to open. So people can see things like that, as well as some tools and personal flown items.
One of the other very famous items that is pictured in the book, and a chapter is included on it, is it's a very sterile name, the lithium hydroxide canister for Apollo 13. This, if you saw the movie, of course, you saw them going through the painstaking procedure of trying to find a solution to cleaning up the the carbon dioxide that was there in the module was building up, and they had to find it using items that they knew were on the ship and only items that they knew were on the ship. And the actual thing that they came up with, the mock-up that they came up with here on Earth, is pictured in this book.
It sort of speaks to even when you plan ahead, problems could still arise, and it was a really ingenious solution that took, yet again, a lot of teamwork and patience and incredible, probably skill and capacity at the time. And there are a number of these examples throughout the Apollo program. So there's another artifact in the book that has a similar type of story, which is the lunar rover fender repair. And so in the last 3 missions of Apollo, they were using lunar rovers, and the fender ripped off the back. And this actually could be quite problematic and dangerous, because if lunar dust too much of it got on a spacesuit, and then it would get into the spacecraft and could be problematic with switches. It could also scratch visors. So they came up with a solution. They called back to mission control, and they worked together and came up with a solution to use duct tape and maps that were on board to create a fender. So a similar type of story, but this happened a number of times, and just sort of speaks to sort of a really amazing problem solving and sort of how nimble the program was to address these issues when they came up.
Teasel Muir-Harmony is a curator at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. You got to get to it, and to the Udvar-Hazy Center. I always pronounce that wrong, but that's okay. In Washington, D.C. People want to learn more, and people want to get a hold of this book, Teasel. What must they do?
Well, so the book is available everywhere books are sold. They should check out the Destination Moon traveling exhibit. Well, it's in Pittsburgh, and then its next stop will be in Seattle in the summer, and then come to the Air and Space Museum. We have a lot of great events scheduled over the course of the next year. We have one coming up in December for Apollo 8, and then next July there'll be quite a lot going on the National Mall. So
thank you.
So come and join us.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye now.
Bye.
There's Teasel Muir-Harmony.